Have you ever noticed how often people claim to value diversity, right up until someone's differences become visible, inconvenient, or uncomfortable? We celebrate acceptance in theory, at least in progressive circles. But in practice, we often expect people to fit in, to quiet down, or just keep certain parts of themselves hidden before they're granted full belonging. The result is a world where many people are tolerated, but far fewer are truly accepted. Welcome to Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be taking a look at 3 readings from the Christian Bible through the lens of sacred myth. As we reflect on the readings for the 11th Sunday in Ordinary Time, we'll explore the journey from recognizing the value of every person to accepting people without demanding conformity, to then turning that acceptance into meaningful action on behalf of our broader human family. In this episode, we're asking a challenging question. Do we actually accept people who are different from us, or do we just tolerate them as long as they stay quiet, invisible, and out of our way? Because there is a world of difference between privately allowing someone to exist and publicly embracing their full humanity. So grab a comfy seat, a glass of your favorite beverage, and let's look at some ancient stories together in this edition of Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be exploring the readings for the 11th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle A of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. In this series, we're exploring readings from the Bible through the lens of sacred myth, looking for interpretations and lessons that don't require belief in the supernatural. Now, these texts were written by pre-scientific people, shaped by their own cultures, needs, and agendas, not as history books or scientific manuals, but as meaning-making stories for their communities. And just like believers approach these writings through the lens of faith, I approach them through a more humanistic lens, one grounded in the idea that certain foundational values helped humans evolve and flourish. Now, you might agree with the lessons I find, or you might find something completely different. That's the beauty of treating these writings as sacred myth. We're free to negotiate with the text and discover whatever insights we need right now. So with that, let's dive in. As I said, tonight we'll be looking at the readings for the 11th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle A. Our first reading is from the book of Exodus. It's chapter 19, verses 2 through verse 6a. Our second reading is from the letter to the Romans. It's chapter 5, verses 6 through 11. And our gospel reading is from Matthew. It's chapter 9, verses 36 through chapter 10, verse 8. Now, we'll start by going through all 3 of the readings, then we'll look for the messages and the main lesson in each one. Finally, we'll bring everything together, look at what it means for us today, and talk about where we go from here. And with that, let's begin. Our first reading is from Exodus. After they set out for Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." Our second reading is from Paul's letter to the Romans. Brothers and sisters, you see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since we have now been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For if, while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son, how much more, Having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life. Not only is this so, but we also boast in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation. And our gospel reading is from Matthew. When Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plenty, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." Jesus called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James, son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. As you go, proclaim this message. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. All right, so let's go back and take a critical look at these readings and see what learnings and lessons we can find if we dig around just a little bit. So our first reading was from Exodus, and at first glance, this passage, it appears to be about a special relationship between God and a particular group of people. It's important to note that ancient cultures often told stories like this. They used the language of being chosen or set apart. And they used that type of language as a way to create a shared identity and to really strengthen social bonds. Whether we view this account as literal history, sacred myth, or something in between, it reflects a deeply human need, which is the desire to know that we matter and that we belong. From a humanist perspective, the most valuable insight here isn't that one group is more important than another. In fact, history shows us how freaking dangerous it is when people convince themselves that they are uniquely favored while everyone else is somehow less worthy. Instead, we can read this passage as a reminder that every community depends on the contributions of many different people. No society is built by a single type of person. It requires thinkers and builders, caregivers and teachers, artists and organizers. Human flourishing emerges when we recognize that each person brings something unique and valuable to the collective whole. Acceptance begins with this recognition. Before we can embrace differences, we have to acknowledge that differences have value. Too often we judge people based on how closely they resemble us, or share our beliefs, or fit our expectations. But healthy communities aren't created through conformity. They're strengthened through diversity of experience and diversity of perspective and diverse talent and different identities. When we understand that every person has something meaningful to contribute, acceptance becomes a hell of a lot more than just tolerance. It becomes genuine appreciation for the richness that human diversity brings. Acceptance begins when we recognize the inherent value of every person. So the main lesson I got from our first reading is that every person has value to the community. The challenge of acceptance, it's not simply allowing people to exist alongside us. It's recognizing their inherent worth, even when they're different from us. When we learn to move beyond labels, beyond categories, and we learn to set aside our expectations, that's when we start to see what strong communities have always understood. Every person contributes something that can't be fully replaced by anyone else. Acceptance starts with recognizing that truth. Every person has value to the community. Our second reading was from the letter to the Romans. And this reading, it got me thinking about how human beings have a tendency to make acceptance conditional. We welcome people when they agree with us, when they behave the way we expect, or fit comfortably into our social circles. We tend to extend a nice, warm welcome after someone has proven themselves worthy of it. Yet this passage presents a different idea. It describes acceptance being offered before transformation, before improvement, before any conditions had been met. Now, beneath the theological language is a very human insight. People don't become worthy because they're accepted. However, they do tend to grow because they've been accepted. Now, this doesn't mean that we should ignore harmful behavior or abandon healthy boundaries. If you've listened to me for very long, you've heard me say that many times. It's important to say it again here because we need to understand that acceptance is not the same thing as approval. We can disagree with someone's choices, challenge harmful actions, or hold people accountable while still recognizing their humanity. The problem arises when we treat people as though their value depends entirely on whether they meet our standards. When acceptance becomes conditional like that, belonging becomes incredibly fragile, and communities become places of judgment rather than places that support personal and communal growth. So many of the divisions we see today are fueled by this very dynamic. Political differences, religious disagreements, cultural conflicts, and all sorts of social labels. These tend to become reasons to withdraw compassion from one another. We start sorting people into categories of deserving and undeserving, acceptable and unacceptable. But acceptance asks something more difficult of us. It asks us to recognize the dignity of people before they change, before they agree with us, and before they become easier to love. That recognition creates the conditions where understanding, growth, and reconciliation become possible. And it is a challenge. But we need to remember that acceptance, true acceptance, means valuing people before they become who we think they should be. So the main lesson I got from our second reading is that we must accept people before they change. Acceptance is not about lowering standards or avoiding difficult conversations. It's about refusing to make human worth dependent on conformity. Every one of us is unfinished. Every one of us has flaws, blind spots, and imperfections, me included, believe it or not. If acceptance is reserved only for those who have already arrived, none of us are going to qualify. Real acceptance begins when we extend dignity first and then allow growth to follow. We must accept people before they change. Okay, our final reading was from the Gospel of Matthew. And one of the most compelling moments in this passage isn't the miraculous language about healing diseases and raising the dead, or about the commissioning of the disciples. The most compelling moment is the simple observation that someone looked at a crowd of struggling people and felt compassion. In the world today, how many people with power do that? Most of them seem to look down on those who are struggling, calling them lazy or failures, instead of acknowledging the systems that are rigged against them. In this reading, the crowd that Jesus saw wasn't described as a collective of perfect individuals. They were confused. They were vulnerable. They needed support. That image remains deeply relevant today. Every community contains people who are overwhelmed or isolated, people who are grieving or fearful or just trying to navigate this complicated world we live in. Acceptance begins when we see those struggles rather than judging people for having those struggles. Too often acceptance stops at attitude. And we tell ourselves that we're open-minded, we're tolerant, we're inclusive. But our actions never move beyond those private beliefs. Yet this passage challenges that tendency. Compassion in this story leads directly to action. Jesus saw a problem, empowered his apostles, and sent them out to help people, to improve the lives of those who were struggling. In other words, the response to human need isn't just feeling sorry for people. It isn't just offering up thoughts and prayers. The response to human need is empowering others to help. Whether the story is understood literally or symbolically, the message is pretty damn clear. Communities become stronger when ordinary people take responsibility for caring for one another rather than waiting for someone else to solve the problem. Acceptance also requires us to widen the circle of our concern. It's easy to care for people who look like us, or think like us, or belong to our social group. The greater challenge is extending empathy across differences. The diverse human family includes people from different cultures, different beliefs, different identities, just incredibly different backgrounds and life experiences. If the acceptance we offer stays limited to our own tribe, it's not really acceptance at all. Genuine acceptance recognizes that human suffering deserves a response regardless of who's experiencing it. Acceptance becomes meaningful when it inspires us to care for other people, especially those who are different from us. So the main lesson I got from our gospel reading is that we must turn acceptance into action. Acceptance is more than recognizing someone's worth and more than welcoming them without conditions. It ultimately asks something of us. It asks us to notice when others are struggling, to extend empathy across differences, and to contribute to the well-being of our communities in very practical ways. When acceptance moves from an idea to a habit, it can turn into a force that strengthens the entire human family. We must turn acceptance into action. All right, let's review the lessons we've talked about so far. In our first reading from Exodus, the main lesson I came away with was every person has value to the community. In our second reading from Romans, the main lesson I got was we must accept people before they change. And finally, the main lesson I got from our gospel reading was we must turn acceptance into action. Acceptance is often talked about as if it's simply being polite or learning to tolerate people who are different from us. But these readings point toward something a hell of a lot deeper. They invite us to recognize that every person brings something valuable to the human story. They ask us to extend dignity and belonging before people have earned our approval, and then to let that recognition inspire meaningful action on behalf of others. In a world that constantly pressures us to sort people into categories of us and them, acceptance asks us to do the much harder work of widening the circle. It challenges us to see the humanity in people who think differently, live differently, or struggle differently than we do. And when we truly embrace that perspective, acceptance stops being a passive attitude. It becomes an active commitment to building a world where everyone has the opportunity to belong, contribute, and flourish. So let's step back and take another look at these readings overall and see if we can figure out what these lessons really mean to us in our daily lives. To do this, I'll try to answer two questions. So what? And now what? Okay, so what? Why should we care about any of this? Well, we should care because exclusion is tearing our communities apart. Every day, we see people being labeled as outsiders because of their religion, or nationality, or race, or political beliefs, or gender identity, or sexual orientation. Far too often, those lines are drawn by people who claim to believe in compassion, dignity, and human worth, and they claim to speak on behalf of an unprovable supernatural being, God. Whatever we think about ancient scriptures, though, the idea that some people are disposable while others are valuable is a dangerous idea. The moment we start deciding who deserves dignity and who doesn't, we create a society where nobody's rights are ever going to be truly secure. These lessons are important because acceptance is not the same thing as agreement. One of the biggest mistakes we make is believing that respecting someone's humanity requires us to approve of everything they do or believe. It doesn't. In healthy communities, people disagree all the time. The real test is whether we can extend respect and belonging to people who are different from us. If acceptance only applies to people who think, vote, worship, or live exactly like we do, then it isn't acceptance at all. It's conformity, no matter how hard we try to make it look like some sort of virtue. We should care about this because compassion without action accomplishes very little. It's easy to say we care about people who are struggling. It's a lot harder to show up, speak up, volunteer, donate, advocate, or support policies that actually improve people's lives. The problems facing our communities aren't solved by good intentions alone. We need good intentions, but that's not enough. If we truly believe that every person matters, then our concern has to eventually leave the realm of words and ideas, and it needs to become something tangible that helps real people who are facing very real challenges in their lives. This is all important because our future depends on it. The biggest challenges facing humanity: climate change, economic inequality, political polarization, public health crises, all the global conflicts that are going on. Those challenges don't give a shit about borders, ideologies, or cultural divisions. They don't care about your freaking religion. We solve these problems together or not at all. Acceptance is it's not just about being nice to one another. It's about recognizing that our lives, whether we like it or not, our lives are deeply interconnected. The more we divide ourselves into competing tribes, the weaker we get. The more we embrace our shared humanity while valuing our differences, the stronger our chances of building a future where everyone can flourish. Acceptance is not a passive feeling of tolerance. It's an active commitment to recognizing the worth of every person, extending dignity without demanding conformity, and then working together to build communities where everyone has the opportunity to belong, contribute, and thrive. So the last question I'll try to answer is, now what? What are we supposed to do? Well, Some of the most important forms of personal growth happen when we stop examining other people's behavior and start examining our own assumptions. If you're listening to these presentations of Mythologizing the Bible, it's likely that you think of yourself as a very accepting person. But acceptance becomes a lot more complicated when someone's differences challenge our comfort, our expectations of what normal people should be like, or our personal preferences when it comes to what we consider to be social norms. So with that in mind, here's your question for the week. Whose difference do I secretly tolerate, only on the condition that they keep it quiet, invisible, or polite? And what would it look like to accept them out loud? This question matters because it helps us identify the gap between the person we believe ourselves to be and the person we actually are in practice. It's easy to support diversity in the abstract. It's a lot harder when someone expresses a political opinion we don't like, or practices a different religion, or speaks with an unfamiliar accent, or openly identifies as LGBTQ+, or lives with a very visible disability, or just simply refuses to fit neatly into our expectations. That's often where conditional tolerance starts to reveal itself. We aren't rejecting the person outright. We're just sort of asking them to be less visible, less vocal, and in a sense, less themselves. When I was in high school and college during the 1980s, being openly gay was far less common than it is today, at least in the Midwest where I grew up. And looking back, it felt like there were only two categories. People were either deeply in the closet, presenting themselves as straight to the world, or they were very openly and proudly gay, right? They were loud and proud. Popular comedians built entire routines around these gay stereotypes, and I laughed at plenty of those jokes myself. I told plenty of those jokes myself. At the time, I never really examined the assumptions I had absorbed from the culture around me. After my sophomore year of college, I spent an entire school year as an intern at a Jesuit retreat center near Cincinnati, Ohio. There were 4 full-time staff members and four or five interns, and several members of our team were gay. During the retreats, that part of their lives never came up. Since the Catholic Church's position on homosexuality was very well known even then, that felt comfortable to me. I could accept them because I wasn't being asked to confront anything that challenged my existing worldview. Looking back, that's a perfect example of conditional tolerance. I was fine with who they were as long as that part of their identity stayed mostly invisible. The challenge came when the retreat participants weren't around. And after the first day of each retreat, our team would gather in the kitchen of an old stone mansion next door that housed the Jesuit community. We called it the Rock House. We'd debrief the day, make plans for tomorrow, and have a couple of beers. Over time, those meetings became less formal. We'd stay longer, talk more, gradually get to know one another as friends. As that happened, the differences that had seemed so significant at one point just started to fade into the background. I think I stopped seeing categories and started seeing the people. I learned about their hopes, their dreams, their struggles. I got to know their sense of humor, their talents. I got to hear their stories. And the more I got to know them, the harder it became to hold on to the assumptions and the stereotypes that I'd been carrying with me. What I eventually realized was that acceptance became easy once I truly knew these folks. The mistake was waiting for that to happen first. If I had started from a place of acceptance instead of a place of suspicion, I would have built those relationships faster and I would have learned far more from them. Now, that's a lesson I still carry with me today. Look, I still have biases. I still catch myself making assumptions. But I've learned that when I consciously choose acceptance first, curiosity and understanding always tend to follow. And in my experience, that approach has never made my life smaller. It has always made my life richer. Taking this question seriously can make you a better friend, a better family member, neighbor, leader, a better citizen. It can help you build stronger relationships, help you reduce unconscious bias, and it can help you become more aware of the invisible conditions you might be placing on people's belonging. Most importantly, it challenges you to move beyond private approval and move toward more visible support. So spend some time with our question this week. Whose difference do I secretly tolerate only on the condition that they keep it quiet, invisible, or polite? And what would it look like to accept them out loud? Sometimes accepting out loud means speaking up when someone is being excluded. Sometimes it means making space for someone else's authentic self. Sometimes it simply means letting people be fully human without asking them to shrink themselves to make us more comfortable. That's where acceptance stops being a belief and starts becoming a practice. Well, before I wrap things up, I'd like to leave you with one more thought. American civil rights activist and poet Audre Lorde once wrote, "It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." I think Lorde puts her finger on something many of us would often rather avoid. Most of us are comfortable with differences as long as those differences remain quiet, private, or easy to ignore. We tell ourselves we're accepting because we're not openly hostile. But that's not quite the same thing as genuine acceptance. If we're only comfortable with someone's identity, their culture or beliefs or their way of life when it stays out of sight, then we're not really accepting the differences. We're only barely tolerating it. That's what makes our question this week so important. When we ask ourselves whose differences we tolerate only on the condition that they remain invisible, we're uncovering the gap between passive tolerance and active acceptance. Lorde's quote challenges us to go a step further. Notice that she doesn't stop at recognition or even acceptance. She adds the word celebrate. It's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. That is a much higher bar. Celebration means seeing diversity not as a problem to manage or a discomfort to endure. It means seeing diversity as a strength that enriches our communities and expands our understanding of what it means to be human. So this week, don't just ask whether you can peacefully coexist with people who are different from you. Ask whether you're willing to make room for them to be fully themselves. Ask whether you're willing to speak up when others are excluded. Ask whether you're willing to move beyond silent approval and into visible solidarity. Because acceptance isn't just about what happens inside our heads. Acceptance is about creating a world where people don't have to hide who they are in order to belong. All right, we've come to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week. But in the meantime, I encourage you to engage with our question for the week. And pay attention to the important lessons you come across wherever you find them. You'll create a more purposeful and joyful life, and you'll start to feel more connected to the world and the people around you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mythologizing the Bible, as we did a deeper dive into the readings for the 11th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle A of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. Remember that acceptance is an active commitment to recognizing the worth of every person, extending dignity without demanding conformity, and then working together to build communities where everyone has the opportunity to belong, contribute, and thrive. The Bible readings for this episode are from the Holy Bible New International Version, NIV, copyright 1973, 1978, 1984, 2011, by Biblica Inc., used by permission, all rights reserved, worldwide. Thank you again for listening. If you like this content, please consider telling a friend about it. The more people who hear the positive messages I'm sharing, the better. Mythologizing the Bible is a live-streamed series. It's held most Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/thecodaproject. Every week, the audio of these Mythologizing the Bible presentations is released as a podcast. You can find the podcast at thecodaproject.com or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Pocket Casts. To learn more, to subscribe to my mailing list, and to keep up on everything I'm doing with the Coda Project, please visit thecodaproject.com.